This is Transqat. What is Transqat? Transqat is a safe space. It's a place for respectful conversations about transgender issues. It's a place for queer people to come tell their stories. I'm host Clare McCarthy. Welcome to Transqat. Dru Levasseur is the director of DEI, that is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, for the National LGBTQ Bar Association. Through his consulting and coaching group, Lavender Law 365, he's a keynote speaker for Fortune 500 companies. For a decade, he was senior attorney and trans rights project leader for Lambda Legal. Dru runs a group called Trans in Big Law, and he is the co-founder of the Jim Collins Foundation. He is the author of Gender Identity Defines Sex. Updating the law to reflect modern medical science is key to transgender rights. It is a privilege to welcome to the show Dru Levasseur. Dru, welcome to Transqat. If I could just have you tell folks what you do.
My name is Dru Levasseur. My pronouns are he and him. I am currently the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the National LGBTQ Bar, which is based in D.C., and I am an openly transgender attorney.
Now, DEI is one of those things that the far right, particularly over the last year and a half, has been trying really hard to weaponize.
Yeah.
One of many things related to people like you and I. Yeah. People like you and me. But they've definitely tried to weaponize it, I guess probably most visibly recently with Dr. Claudine Gay at Harvard, where it basically looked like a setup to... Yeah. So let's start with DEI. What is it?
Well, it came about, the latest iteration that we know of is actually was in response to a lawsuit in the workplace. I think it was a Coca-Cola lawsuit where somebody brought a claim saying, look, there is inequity in the workplace. And so there was a real push to try to address under the law a lot of the gaps that we see in the workplace. So it came about ironically from kind of, we need to do this because of, legal implications. And it has grown over the years to be a force where people are really trying to address inequality in the workplace, make sure that companies are in alignment, looking at the numbers of who's missing from the workplace. And that really does matter. In the US, we really are interested in making the business case, money talks. And, we have really clear data that diverse teams perform better, that we bring in more money. We just do our jobs better when we have those kinds of diverse teams at the table. So we know that it's good for business. We know it's also good for social good. So we have all those kind of tools there. But yeah, there's been quite a backlash where there's, I think, a misunderstanding around what DEI really is.
So it's designed, despite what anybody might say, it is designed to address and adjust injustices, inequalities in the workplace, in the education environment.
Yeah, and it's designed to lift all boats. It's designed to say, look, let's level the playing field. Let's get everybody in here. It's not designed as, I think it's been kind of, the spin has been like, oh, it's giving, special treatment to certain people. That's not what's happening here. Yeah. It's addressing and acknowledging that there is structural racism, that there are structural barriers, that certain people have more privilege in this society, and trying to kind of level that.
Right. The difference between equity and equality. Exactly. That in theory, we are all equal and we can all go out and apply for the same jobs. But in reality, there is an imbalance in equity. One of the things that I was thinking about is that when I was teaching back in the early 90s, I was at a school out in the Berkshires, and I was asked to be the first advisor to their GSA. And it was very clear to me that this was not being done out of a sense of, let's open our hearts to the queer people. It was very much a reaction to a number of districts losing lawsuits
Yeah.
that said, my child committed suicide or my child was harmed, and you, the district, didn't do enough to protect them. So this far down the road, 30 years down the road, are we still at a point where addressing DEI is in a company's best interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the data still stands around, how this improves the workplace. But it's interesting, your story, because I am seeing like there's two different roads people come to this work. One is that they're really trying to, they see the injustice, they see the gaps, and they say, we want our workplace to, be in line with best practices. We want to, we want to be in alignment with the values we have and that we're putting out there. And so we're doing it for these reasons because we need to, we should, and we're thinking of it as the people who we want to support. Other people come to this maybe because of kind of your story, like where there's been a blunder or a horror story, like you've said, where things have really gone awry. And they're doing it because they really are being pushed to do it, and they have to. And so one example it makes me think of is like when I talk about misgendering in the workplace, there's a lot of conversation around that. Like some people are like, okay, we want to learn and get better at this and make sure we're using everyone's appropriate pronouns because we see the harm when we are misgendering somebody and the psychological harm and how it makes people not want to stay, and it affects retention, and it, for all these reasons. Versus sometimes I'll mention, well, there also have been lawsuits, like the Lusardi case where their repeated misgendering, is seen as, harassment in the workplace.
Tell me about that.
This was a case involving a government employee and trans woman, and her supervisor was repeatedly, on purpose misgendering her in the workplace, and the court found that was part of the claim of discrimination in the workplace. So I don't always lead with that. But sometimes I'll when I'm going to speak somewhere, they'll say, yes, do mention that, because sometimes some people need to know there are parameters around that this is how to behave in the workplace. We have to be respectful. So there's a range of reasons why people are engaging in DEI, and I'll just say all of those reasons work. Whatever it takes for us to kind of make people's lives better, I think that's really important.
And when you're doing this work, you're doing this with big law firms, with corporations? Who are you working with?
Right now, I mean, the LGBTQ+ Bar, our mission is to promote justice within the legal profession and supporting LGBTQ+ people. So our constituents are, judges, lawyers, law students, everybody in the legal field. So I'm hitting almost 5 years in the coming months of doing this work. Tallied that I have reached 35,000 legal professionals, with these audiences. Mostly are global law firms, and mostly I'll do like continuing legal education, CLE, kind of talks to hundreds of people. But my favorite thing I've gotten to do is to, do the consulting behind the scenes and have those hard conversations, and also look at policies and practices and things like that. So most of my clients are law firms. I also work with nonprofit, government, companies, large companies, and also I've worked with law schools as well.
When you're dealing with a global entity like that, how do you resolve? I mean, we can't even resolve things politically here in the States. It becomes this incredibly antagonistic, not even a conversation, a shouting match. How do you do that on a global level?
Yeah, I find that to be really exciting, and I feel like there's a lot to leverage when there's a global company, because they're already set up to look at many different ways of viewing things, and they're coming to the table thinking about a wide range of needs of their employees. And I always find that that's a really great way in. But it can be challenging, as you said, like, for example, when we're talking about like LGBTQ+ employees and supporting them, there's going to be so many different ways of doing that throughout the world, and different companies might have offices in countries where being LGBTQ plus could be illegal, being who you are. And there are still countries where you could be killed.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking, for example, about promoting self-ID campaigns, which that is like collecting demographic data, including not just like race and gender, but collecting more information like sexual orientation and gender identity, being more inclusive in that optional, confidential way to allow people to be seen in the workplace. It could be tricky if they have an office, in a country where, that could put somebody at risk.
Right.
So, working with them on how to do these initiatives, but do it in a way that protects people in the workplace.
Yeah. Something really small for a company or an institution. What is the value of having email signatures with your pronoun preference in that? Is that just snowflakery? Is it just, what's the term, virtue signaling, or does it serve some actual purpose?
It's so important, actually. It's been a really popular conversation because one of the things I get to do in my work is facilitate this Trans in Big Law monthly networking meeting. And this came about 2 years ago, where one of my clients, Debevoise, they invited me to create this group and invite other people and other firms. And it's gone from one person to almost 60 people, have partners, associates, business professionals, a wide range of people. And I get to sit every month and listen to a lot of the pain points of people in the legal profession. And a lot of the subject comes up is, around pronouns. So it's been wonderful to see in the last 4+ years this kind of campaign of law firms and other companies to say, let's include pronouns in the email signature. But without a conversation of why that matters or why everybody can do it and how much that's helpful, it's really kind of just the checking the box thing.
Yeah.
And so I think it's incredibly important. It is so important to kind of lift the burden from just the trans or non-binary people of putting their pronouns in. And if everybody's doing it, it's not virtue signaling. It's sending a message that we actually know trans and non-binary people exist, and we welcome them here in our workplace. And, by modeling that easy ally move, it's really helpful for everyone else to say, okay, we're acknowledging people's pronouns.
Yeah. And I would imagine both within the organization and without, if I'm looking to your law firm as a client and I see that this is just part of the the daily operations, is that this is part of the signature, odds are pretty good that I'm going to feel more comfortable putting my trust in you and asking you to represent me.
Yeah, actually, I did one of these trainings for a big law firm, and this New York-based partner, white straight guy, was very excited. He added his pronouns, and he circled back about a month later to me, and he was like, "Drew, really excited. I added my pronouns, and it was a very competitive bid for this client, and they went with us." And the client, she came back and told me that the reason we did was because I saw that you had your pronouns there, and that's a very, that your workplace has this, inclusive, workplace. And so that was great. And I had him do a short video for us on the website to kind of say, this is actually good for business.
Nice.
Yeah.
When I came out, I was working at a school, and it was the situation you were just describing, where the queer and openly queer-friendly people, and there weren't a lot of us, we put pronouns, and so when I came out, I started doing that, and I got a call from the head of the custodians, who is a really sweet guy. And I was like, oh dear. And he says, yeah, I wanted to ask you about this she, her thing. What's the point? Why are you doing this? And I said, well, I don't pass. And so I can imagine somebody who had good intentions looking at my physicality and saying, I'm not really sure which pronoun to use. So I'm just trying to be helpful. Yeah. I'm not being the PC police. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm just saying, if you're interested in being kind, here's what I prefer. And for me, it really doesn't go any further than that. And there was this silence on the other end, and he was like, oh, Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, thanks.
I love that.
And I had kind of been braced for confrontation, and it was that teachable moment that we look for with our kids,
Yeah.
where things like that can start a conversation that might help somebody. Something as small as that.
Yeah, I love that, and I love your approach. One thing that's just on my mind about pronouns, though, is like 60% of the trans and big law group is actually non-binary folks. And we're seeing, the next generation of people entering the workforce, particularly in the legal profession, are Gen Z. And we're only going to be seeing more people.
Right.
And, the younger generation will teach us the way because, I hear parents with trans kids are like, yeah, this is no big deal, but it's a big deal to us, so, so we're learning from them. But, this is here to stay. And there is a lot of, maybe people are getting a little bit better about binary, pronouns, or, binary trans people, and they're like more comfortable. They have a framework for that. But there's a lot of work to be done for people who are non-binary in these workplaces. And it could be really like 1,000 paper cuts a day when somebody's just getting their pronoun wrong all day long. And then they're trying to do this really high profile, hard job. And so I'm just, when I talk to people about this, it's so critical when we think about like our society is so obsessed with these two boxes of gender. And imagine that you don't fit in those boxes. That's truly who you are. It's like your core sense of yourself. And that's really hard all day long. So when we can get it right for somebody, it can make such a difference. It could be such an uplift for them of support. And so I try to come at it both ways, that it could be really harmful when we get it wrong. And nobody likes to hurt people like that. But, and so we have to kind of build that empathy piece, but also it could just be such a support when we're getting it right. Yeah.
When you have states passing bathroom laws, for example, accommodation laws, they're really only passing them against people like me who create cognitive dissonance. And this is where a lot of our non-binary siblings come into play, is that that's where, what I mean? If you look like Janet Mock, you can walk into any bathroom, any women's bathroom anywhere in the world, and nobody's going to bat an eye. But sometimes when I do, I get the look. And that, of course, ties into things like economics. Can you afford surgeries that would help signal a little better? Or can you not? And so it ties in with all sorts of things that people aren't seeing. And it really does create, within this subgroup that we're calling trans and non-binary people, it creates a lesser subgroup, those who pass and those who don't.
Yeah, and then add on that race and other marginalized identities. And I think it's great that you talk about this, because I feel like sometimes people like avoid, it's like, oh, taboo, we don't want to talk about passing. But what you're talking about, though, is the reality of people's lives, and it is about privilege. Like I hear trans people talking about, I have cis passing privilege. Like I'm not going to be targeted. There might be other circumstances where things could go terribly wrong for somebody, right? But we're talking about, like, when we look at the numbers of the number of trans people who are murdered, who within our community is targeted the most? It's trans women. It's trans women of color, particularly Black trans women. So adding in like the misogyny, the racism, the homophobia, all these different things. But I think it's important that you do name that, especially as we're seeing the growing number of these anti-trans laws in the country. People need to know that like people are feeling really at risk for very good reason. How do we center the people who are most impacted by that?
Right.
And we need to have that conversation.
When you and I talk about these subjects, you're talking with over a decade of experience at Lambda Legal. So tell me about your time there, what you were doing.
Yeah. I transitioned during law school about 20 years ago, and it was very challenging. The legal profession was definitely not set up for supporting trans or non-binary people at the time, and I experienced unbelievable outright discrimination. I'm still seeing a lot of that happening, unfortunately, even 20 years later.
So not just the sort of inadvertent, casual, if you will, misgenderings or dead namings, but things that were actively harmful?
Yes, like blatant types of things.
What did that look like?
Well, I testified before the ABA right after I graduated, talking about some of the experiences I had like during interviews with law firms, where people would say, we don't have any gay people at this firm, and if you were, you'd be the only one in the group, or what does this transgender mean? Like just very blatant stuff about like my presentation, my gender expression. Nobody knew what gender I was, and it was just so clear that this is not a safe work environment, and so it's full circle for me now to be working improving our workplaces. But in between there in my career, for about 11 years, I did impact litigation in New York City mostly. And I was the director of the Transgender Rights Project at Lambda Legal, which you might know is like the oldest, largest LGBT legal organization. That was during like 2009 to 2019. So I'll say my time there was, I started off being the token trans attorney. I was the only trans person at the table. Speaking of, who's at the table, at the most powerful LGBT legal organization for several years, when all eyes were on same-sex marriage. So my role at the beginning was, nagging person and excuse me, what about, these issues?
The gadfly in the room, yeah.
Somebody had to do it. And also my role was to leverage trans power within the organization to make sure I wasn't the only one there. So I did have an opportunity to be at like the first trans meeting at the White House in 2011. And, I was at the table where we were starting to be on the radar in different ways, where there was good policies being passed back then, And then in 2015, at the middle of my time there, we won marriage as a movement. And suddenly the backlash began and all eyes were on trans issues. And so then my role shifted to, and there were more, all of a sudden my colleagues were doing these cases. Mostly cisgender colleagues, lovely, well-intentioned people, but they did not necessarily know how to talk about our lives. And Ayanna Pressley always says those closest to the pain need to be closest to the power. It was critical to have trans and non-binary people in the organization at the table, more voices, and to actually be leading the work. And I saw firsthand, speaking of DEI, what a difference it makes who is in your workplace. Like, for example, I'm a white trans guy. I have cis passing privilege now, and I'm from New England, okay? I was leading this work, and when we hired on an amazing Black trans woman attorney who was from the South, her lens on casework was incredible. Her connection to different clients we had. I saw firsthand how people's backgrounds and identities can really enhance the work. She had these amazing creative ideas of which claims to bring, so I could see how when we have diverse teams, we do better work, and it's essential to have that. So that was kind of my journey there, and just bringing the power to more trans people. And if I could say my biggest mark was not necessarily the cases that I won or policies I worked on, but it was about changing the hearts and minds of my colleagues and getting out of the way for the next generation of leadership. And so they feel like I carry that with me when I moved over to do DEI work.
That's got to be hard on one level, in that when you are the only voice at the table, obviously you feel a sense of ownership. You feel a sense of, this is my job, my responsibility. But to be thinking more long term, that this is much bigger than me. I need to be bringing along the next group of people. That can't be easy.
Well, like, my whole approach to doing this work has been that this is not my work. This is community work. And I think you might have heard that when you spoke to Tony Ferriolo. Like, when we co-founded the Jim Collins Foundation, it was always that this is the community's nonprofit, to fund surgeries for trans people. And my work when I was the director of the Trans Rights Project, the best thing I could do with my work was to be channeling, listening, and and speaking up for the voices that weren't there. And even, when I would feel scared about going into a meeting or speaking in front of large audiences and being this openly trans person, and it's still to this day, I think about the people that we've lost along the way, the people that didn't make it. But somebody like me doing this work, this was what they lived and died for, that sometime down the road there will be somebody, a trans person, speaking up like this. And that's what I'm investing in, is the generation that we're going to see after us, of like dreaming up of, the younger people and how they're going to be feeling about themselves and how they're going to be approaching their leadership roles.
Entirely separate from your victories and your own CV is the fact that you are representation, and so for kids coming up, they can look and see, oh, okay, I could belong here. I could have it probably wouldn't be the easiest path, but if you can see somebody like yourself, that speaks to possibility. It speaks to, not to overstate, but a reason to live.
Yeah. I've heard that throughout my whole career. And I think that when, times get really hard, I think back and I think about like younger kids saying, I could be a lawyer, look at Dru. And that, when it's hard to be visible, when it's scary to be out there, I think about, for me, it's so critical to be inspiring, like you said, to tell people you get to exist. We get to exist. Yeah. I also think of the quote from Dr. Aaron Reeves, who talks about an amazing DEI leader who says, I don't remember the exact quote, but it's something about, you might not see yourself in leadership, but don't let that stop you. And that's so important, because maybe you do see someone like me and I'm a lawyer doing this work, but when I'm thinking of the trans and big law people, they're like, they've never seen a trans partner at a firm or non-binary partner. It's a lot of pressure to be the first, to be that pioneering role. And we could talk a lot about all of the things that we don't hear about with those roles, but it does make a difference. But even if you don't see yourself represented, you don't see like that Black trans person who made partner yet, it doesn't mean, don't let that stop you. Keep going.
Yeah, that maybe that's the next step, and you're the one to take that. I've heard you in some of your conversations say that you encountered a trans judge while you were in law school. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about her.
Well, Judge Phyllis Fry, we call her my trans grandmother, I think, or maybe she calls herself that too. She's a force to be reckoned with. I remember when I was thinking about going to law school, I'm first generation lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers. I don't come from money. And it was quite a ambitious idea. And back then they had a VHS. I think I ordered I ordered the VHS.
Be kind, rewind.
Yes. Like Blockbuster. Yeah. I ordered it in the mail it was I think from LSAC, being LGBT in the legal profession. And they just interviewed a few people within our community, and the one trans person in the video was Phyllis Fry. I don't think she was a judge yet. And I just remembered her like, wow, there's a trans person who's a lawyer. And I saw her at some conferences along the way during law school, and I was too afraid to talk to her. But at some point when I was really struggling and I was thinking, how am I going to make it in this profession? I was experiencing bullying from classmates. I was looked at as if I was other, didn't belong. I did not feel like I belonged at all in so many different ways, and so many micro and macro aggressions that were happening to me. I reached out to her on email, and from my Hotmail account, probably.
There we go.
And she wrote me back.
Possibly through your MySpace account. We're not sure, but
I don't know if she was on MySpace. I definitely was. But I reached out to her, and she sent me an email back, said something like, keep going. She might have said, what do you call the last person in your class, in law school? A lawyer, something like that. And she said, thank you for being out. And that, I could still find that email, but that just stuck in my head, because I think about what you were saying about those who get to pass, and there's a lot of people who live stealth, meaning not out, and that's fine, and there's no responsibility or judgment. But to see like the people who have inspired me most have been the ones who are on the front lines, who are visible, and who are unapologetic. And that's what to me, that's what she represented. And I wanted to be like that. And so, down the road, I graduated, I became a lawyer, I clerked, and then I met her at a conference, and I told her, I'm the one that you emailed back. She probably got a lot of emails, and she really, I could tell it meant something to her. And then she later became appointed as a judge, and now there's like 6 or 7 trans judges. They're just the first trans masculine judge, Judge Seth Marnin, was just appointed. So we're seeing a growing number, but back then, there were very few, and it meant a lot.
We are recording this on, what is today, the 9th?
I think so.
The 9th of February. And so yesterday the news was full of the Supreme Court's deliberations. And I look at those 9 faces, and I don't really see a lot that represents me.
Yeah.
I don't, aside from the obvious that 6 of them are probably not especially open to people like me. But I look and what it would mean to have somebody at that table, what it would mean to have someone where it wasn't an abstract concept that they were debating or discussing, but here's my lived experience.
Yeah.
Let me bring that to the table.
Yeah, it really does matter. And, the legal profession, it's a powerful profession. What are the stats around like who in Congress and Senate? Having a law degree and being a lawyer, it really, it's a status thing in our society. And it really does matter who is in a position of power with judges and so on. But I'll also say though, so it's great that we're in the profession, but I also just want to hold that even if we're seeing all these anti-trans laws and we're seeing not our faces on the courts, and I was reminded by Susan Stryker. She talked about, it was at a funeral of a trans elder a couple months back, and it was very moving. But she said, the younger generation right now is freaking out about, oh my God, we don't have these laws, or they're rolling these things back and we're not here or not there. And she's like, just a few decades ago, we had none of this.
Yeah.
And we survived and we were okay. So that to me, when I get scared, I remember what she said, that these are all great gains, but don't panic. We have each other. We're not going anywhere. Trans people are not going away. We've always been around. We're not a new phenomenon. So I hold on to the elders, like Robina Asti, that client I had who was 92. And I think, just when people say, well, I'm just old school, I'm like, well, let me introduce you to somebody.
So Robina. Well, actually, that's where I wanted to go next, because in your work with Lambda Legal, there's the abstract is the word I was using, but there's the sort of the policy level of what you're fighting for. But there were 2 folks that I wanted to ask you to talk about, and one was Robina over survivor benefits. So tell me her story.
Well, first of all, you have to check out the 7-minute short video Lambda Legal did about her life. It won international awards for short film because she's just so dynamic, but also the filmmaker did a great job. So I don't know if we could put it in the notes, but I'll send you the link for people to check it out.
Absolutely.
But Robina Asti was a World War II veteran. She was a trans woman who transitioned, I think, in the 60s or 70s. And she lived stealth, as she just lived her life as a woman for about 30 years in New York City. And I think she was a president or vice president of a bank, had, lived her life, and she didn't really think twice about that until her husband, Norwood Patton, passed away, and she, like any person she filed for survivor benefits with the Social Security Administration. And she got this denial letter that said, we don't consider your marriage to be valid because of her gender. And so she marched into our office on Wall Street, and let me frame this. We did not have people come by. That's not the kind of, Lambda Legal's office. It's more like you would call the help desk or send an email, but she marched in there. And it was like, it changed my life. I know it changed several of my colleagues. That first meeting, I get choked up thinking about it because it was like meeting my trans grandmother. No offense to Judge Phyllis Fry, but it was like she was literally my grandmother's age if she was still alive. And there's something about like, family acceptance. We know that that's the biggest antidote against suicide is when people accept, family acceptance, school acceptance, when you're surrounded by people who are accepting you. But to feel like, oh my gosh, there's somebody who is transgender in her 90s and so powerful. And she, I remember she reached out and touched my hand and told me how special I was. She's that kind of person that I felt like a real connection to. So we did win her case. The Social Security put the money in her account on Valentine's Day. She believed it was from Norwood, her husband. And I believe that too now. And it was just a beautiful situation. We were able to tell her story. The biggest thing was not necessarily that we, changed the policies around the Social Security, which did impact many people. But it was that we now had Rubina's story for the world in this video, and then we had her speak at places. And then for me personally, I stayed connected to her. She passed away 3 weeks before she turned 100 because she had to do it her way. And right before she died, she went up. She was a flight instructor, and she won the Guinness World Record for oldest female pilot and also oldest female flight instructor before she died. I don't know if that still stands.
The other case that I wanted to ask you about, I saw that you had in the beginning of your book, and that is, I want to say, Denisha McShann.
Yes.
An entirely different tone to this story, but one I wanted to hear you talk about as well.
Yeah, well, this is also another powerful video that we can put in the notes here if people want to see her and hear her beautiful voice. She is an amazing singer. But this case involved a Black trans woman who reached out to Lambda Legal's help desk, and she had been in prison for quite a while, and then she was moved to a halfway house, getting her life together, doing all the things that, very powerful steps in her life to try to get a job and get into society again. And this halfway house, when they realized she was trans, they had a men's section and a women's section and a third section. And they moved her from the women's into the men's section, and they searched her property and took away anything that was LGBT, including a pink shower cap. They thought that she shouldn't have anything like that. So it was clearly discrimination, and we didn't have to go to court with this. We just actually sent a demand letter, and within a few days, they reversed their behavior and they apologized to her. And so I recommend checking out this video, because the best part about it is when she talks about how she was just trying to exist, and that when she was in the situation having to live with men, they didn't have to understand her, but she had to understand them to survive.
Right.
And she also describes the feeling of having a legal advocate send the letter. And I think she said something like, it was like I had been on mute and then my voice came through. And so that for me, it feeds me, feeds my work, as the power of going through all the hell to become a lawyer and all the debt and all the things. It's a very powerful role to play.
Yeah.
That's not about me. It's about me, using these tools and speaking up for other people. And advocating, and it can be so powerful. And there's and so I hope people are inspired to go to law school. And if people need mentorship or sponsorship, reach out.
And feel free to go to. This is a callback to a conversation we were having before the mics start. Feel free to enroll at WENIC, not Western New England University. but Wennick.
Yes, we still call it the old name.
Yep. They can, I wish them all the best. They should get as large and successful as possible. You will always be Wennick to me. Let me bring you back to the trainings, the work you do with institutions and groups. One of the things that I've always found really challenging as a teacher is that you're asking high school students to learn. And to learn involves admitting you don't know.
Oof.
You have to be able, no matter what it is, you know, if I decide on the drive home today, you know what, it's about time I learned how to play guitar, then I kind of have to admit to myself, watching Springsteen videos is not enough. I don't know how to play guitar, and I'm going to have to, active verb here, learn. How do you create an environment where it's not you standing there with a PowerPoint saying, here's the data, here's what we know, but rather creating an environment where people want to admit, I don't know about this, and maybe I should.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I've never been asked. I'm so excited to talk about that. I think that my tactic is to start off the conversation being vulnerable, like Brene Brown kind of just, I get introduced, they sometimes read my bio, it's embarrassing, that kind of thing. And then I'll restart and say, hi, my name is Dru Levasseur. My pronouns are he and him. I often say that I'm an openly trans attorney and that I'm really scared to be speaking in front of you all. I level, because it's true. This doesn't come easy to me. You'd think that after all the many years I've done this, it would get easier, and it doesn't. Every time I speak, I have to work myself up with the courage and think about why it matters to me. And so first of all, I'm real. Mm-hmm. I'm vulnerable. It gets people's attention because they're saying, okay, someone's actually here, and they're here in the box. And then I get in the box, and the way that I talk about these things, first of all, if I talk about language and definitions, I'll say, okay, GLAAD's Media Reference Guide, I love that. But what I say about it is I like to point to it because they're keeping up. The language is ever evolving. I have to keep up. I don't know. And then I share that I look back on a brief I wrote when I was representing this trans guy, in 2010, and I'm horrified at some of the language because we don't say those things anymore. So right. I'm saying look, I'm working on this too. And then when we get to the parts about etiquette and how to, interact, I really try to tell stories about clients I've had and the pain points, and bringing in the empathy and the human aspect of why something matters, of why we don't want to do these things. And I will share when I've screwed up. I'll tell the story about what it felt like when I was being misgendered every day, and I was trying to do a job, and how I just wanted to disappear and hide under a rock, and how that felt. And then I'll share down the road how I've misgendered a colleague, even as the director of the Trans Rights Project, worst trans person ever, and that I saw the pain I caused, and I know that pain. So I think the conversation is not about this is how you're supposed to behave, and here's the things you're supposed to know, and don't do it to be right. Do it because we're all coming from a place of, we're probably going to screw up every day, and leaning into that. If we're really going to get better at being allies, and we're all allies to somebody all the time, as a verb, like you said, if we're really going to do that work, we're going to have to lean in and, like you said, make mistakes, admit that we don't know, get it wrong, learn, feel shame, work through the shame, all those different things. So I feel like that's the kind of approach that I'm sitting next to everybody, and we're all trying to do better. And here's why, because we care about people and we want people to be in this workplace.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think is applicable across the spectrum of DEI. We're two white people sitting here having a conversation. We need to be able to have that same process when we're talking about race or other, because we can bring trans issues to the table, but
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. And even then, like I talk, even though I've done trans work and I'm a member of the community, a lot of my work on behalf of trans people has been as an ally, because a lot of my clients and do not have the same lived experience. So I had to really kind of figure that out and say, and make mistakes. And that's what's so critical about, particularly white leaders moving out of the way, like, doing the work, but doing it as an ally, not just, taking up space in that way. So there's a lot there, but yeah, that's the approach, and it's been a great learning experience. The best thing about my job is that I'm constantly learning and growing. I'm not an expert. I'm learning as I go, and I'm not afraid to say I don't know.
Well, the conversation,
humility,
as you just said, is ongoing. It's evolving. Yeah. So, even the terms, and this is something that I think opposition uses to dismiss, but the fact that probably the terms that we're using right now might not be applicable 25 years from now. That, it might be a different set of vocabulary, a different set of concerns, because the world moves on. And I was actually thinking about this on the drive up here today. You were saying that people are interested in, what should I ask? What should I not ask? What's okay? I don't want to step on toes. I was thinking of a time when it was more than fair game in a job interview to ask a cisgender woman, do you plan on having kids? Mm-hmm. Because that had an economic repercussion for whether or not we hire you. Yeah. And we changed that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. So many different things that were like, oh my God, cringeworthy.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, we don't say that anymore. Yeah, it's funny to think about some of the ones that are also just the trans-specific ones. Like I use the GLAAD Media Reference Guide, and they have not just slurs, but problematic. Mm-hmm. And some of the terms on there, people are like, wait, we're not saying that anymore? It's funny. And I'm like, yeah, I used to say that too, and I guess not, but that's the thing. We're like, okay, and that's great that we're evolving as a society,
Yeah. I have a part-time job at the Book Barn in Niantic. Awesome. And I keep mentioning that on this program, even though they refuse to give me money for these spots. But I was recently reorganizing the queer section.
Awesome.
And I have a colleague who is also trans, who really wanted to pull some books off the shelf because of what we're talking about. The conversation has moved on. And so I've created a shelf for things that, say in a library would probably have been culled by now because it doesn't pass the tests of currency, relevance, so on and so forth. But I mean, if you do that, I'm thinking of like Jan Morris's book Conundrum, which was the first time I saw something that suggested that, forgive me, real people were like this, that it wasn't a punchline, it wasn't a serial killer, it wasn't some, it wasn't a sex worker. It was this person who was a travel writer and incredibly erudite. And I was like, that's possible? But even when I go back and reread that, there are terms like transsexual, and the vocabulary really wasn't there when that book came out, and so it doesn't invalidate the conversation. It just means we've moved on a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's a really great point. I think it's really important for us to have our history, in all the different ways that we've known ourselves. I think that's something, speaking of Susan Stryker, it's just so important for people to have access to LGBTQ plus history. And that, that's part of the battle happening in the US right now, trying to not have our stories told and not have access to books. And, I'm of the camp that yes, it's good to know what we're using now, but I would still want to have access. The books that helped me learn about who I am, or, the movies, yes, they might not have used the language we use now, but it helped me understand a core part of my identity, an authentic part of myself. It's helped keep people alive, and I want to have all of those things available to people. Also, you mentioned I told my story in a deeper way than ever before in the last couple of months, where this book that came out called Surviving Transphobia, I was just a chapter. I was the token lawyer of the book.
It's important to have one of those in the mix.
Exactly. The chapter is called Your Authenticity is Your Power, Tales from a Trans Lawyer. But in that book, it was powerful to read other voices. And Laura Jacobs, who's an amazing openly trans therapist in New York City, she edited and put us all together. And I wanted to mention, because you mentioned like sex work, and there's one person in there who told her story as a trans woman of color, an immigrant, Cecilia Gentili. And she just passed away this week.
I just saw that.
Yeah. And I just recommend people reading her story because it is an incredibly inspiring and powerful narrative about how, she decided to live and to have no shame and to bring so much attention to the people in our community who are on the margins and who are doing sex work and it's just such a powerful story that I would be remiss if I didn't honor her name. And, I know a lot of us are grieving her right now. And so I just wanted to name that. And for me, it was very powerful that we got to be in a book together. I know a lot of people have worked very closely with her over the years, but, the title Surviving Transphobia, and I know she just got to celebrate, I think, her 52nd or 53rd birthday, and it's living her life. And so I just wanted to honor. And that book is a love letter to all of the future generations of like, this is what we did and you could do it too.
Yeah.
So.
Dru, this has been lovely. Thank you so much for your time. Somewhere out there's someone listening to this who is thinking about a career in law. So there's some queer kid. Tell them something before we go. Well,
first of all, it's a hard journey, and we need more numbers at the table. And everybody I know who is a trans or non-binary lawyer is suffering in some great way because we need to really change some of the structures to be more inclusive. And so, first of all, it's not an easy road. Second of all, you will not be alone, and hopefully won't be the first, but you will have a lot of support if you want to do that. And you have my direct line if you're going to do it, because I really believe in putting my time into mentoring and sponsoring the people who are coming up. But what I really want to say, though, is you don't have to be a lawyer to make a difference. You don't have to do any of those kinds of achievements, and you don't have to do anything except stay alive. And I think the biggest takeaway would be, like, we need you regardless. We just want you to stick around and keep going every day and value yourself on the fact that you are being who you truly are, and that's enough, and your existence is enough.
Before we go, I wanted to tell you about a project that I've been fortunate enough to be a very small part of. This spring, the Goodspeed Opera House is presenting a new musical called A Complicated Woman. It'll run May 10th through June 2nd at the Terrace Theater in Chester, Connecticut. Here's the description. John Kenley was a theater impresario who brought Hollywood stars like Gene Kelly and Ann Miller to Ohio's summer stock stages. But when summer ended, he wintered in Florida, where John disappeared and Gene came to life. A Complicated Woman is a new musical that features a Golden Age score and a gender-diverse cast. Join us for the intriguing story of a theater legend who had to navigate the joy, pain, and pitfalls of leading a double life. More information is available at goodspeed.org. I'll put a link in the show notes. This has been Transqat. I'm Clare McCarthy. Thanks for listening. Let's talk soon.
This This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece.
And you've just been listening to Transqat. It is made by one of my favorite people in the world, Clare McCarthy.
Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC.
Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.
Join us on the web at transqat.com.
That's TRANSQAT.com.
QAT.com.
There you'll find links to Transqat, the blog,
Writing projects,
speaking engagements,
and our PayPal donations page.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monkeys.
Monies. Your monies.
Your monies.
not monkeys.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monies. Any monkeys will be gratefully received as well.
Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. On TikTok, we are at The Real Transqat.
Want to tell your story on air?
or ask Claire a question.
What is the deal?
She has all the answers.
Or suggest a guest or topic for an upcoming episode.
Use the contact page at the website
or email her directly at crmtranscat@gmail.com.
crmtranscat@gmail.com.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye.